Hello and welcome to Payoff Pitch Action Network's Major League Baseball betting podcast. I'm Sean Zerillo, and we're here today for a special episode to discuss strikeout prop betting with Sean Koerner. To be clear, not season-long strikeout over-unders, not season-long strikeout leaders. You can find some of that stuff in our divisional betting previews and in our player prop and season-long prop previews, which are also on the Payoff Pitch feed. However, we're going to discuss Sean Koerner's process for projecting strikeout props for all starting pitchers throughout the MLB season, where and how you can access them, and how to take advantage of those props on a daily basis. Koerner, this is my favorite time of year, getting close to my birthday. Every year, my favorite gift for my birthday, the bracket on release, and then getting to dive into your bracket, your contrarian bracket that you put out on actionnetwork.com and in the Action Network app. Spend Monday through Wednesday figuring out my picks, and then March Madness kicks off on Thursday. So I'm excited for your content. I'm sure you're a little excited for baseball season, considering your Angels trending upward a little bit this year. How you doing today?
Yeah, pretty good. Happy early birthday. And I'm right there with you. This is my favorite time of the year as well, even though I'm, heavily invested in NFL. Love March Madness, rolling right into MLB opening day. And to answer your question about the Angels, no, I have zero hope for them this year or anytime soon. But that's fine. I grew up loving them as a kid. I still like them now, but we won that World Series back in '02. So I feel like I'm set for life. The fact that I got to see them win one World Series in my lifetime, I'll rest happy. I remember back when, I don't know if you remember this, but they had a one-game playoff against the Mariners. This is before the World Series win. Randy Johnson was starting against us that game. I was terrified. And the game started at 1 o'clock Pacific time. So I pretended to be sick, and my dad took me out of school so I could go watch it. But that's how heavily invested I was as an Angel fan back then. And now, I have no problem betting against them if I have to. So I'm just hoping to see, a couple of months of healthy Mike Trout, and just, go to a few games and have some fun, but not expecting a World Series ring anytime soon.
My all-time favorite Angel, maybe we can agree on this, Sean Figgins, because all my life people have asked me, how do you spell Sean? And I've said S-E-A-N, not C-H-O-N-E. Not S-H-A-W-N. Wow. And they're like, C-H-O-N-E. I'm like, yeah, you must not be a baseball fan, but that's
okay. He might be my top 20. Tim Salmon's my favorite Angel of all time. Troy Percival's a close second. But I did have one time, I agree with the Sean spelling. One time at Starbucks, I did have C-H-O-N-E on my Starbucks cup, and I had to correct them.
That person who made your coffee was a baseball fan. That's a good barista.
Yeah.
Let's dive into your projection process for figuring out strikeout props. We'll also touch on some home run prop projection stuff at the end. You're allowed to go as deep into this as to what makes your process unique, as shallow as you would like to. But if somebody is going to make their own projections for figuring out strikeout props for a pitcher for a specific game, what are some of the data points that they must incorporate into that projection?
Yeah, so I'll just talk, a pretty high level how I started about this. It's something that I'm still evolving. I'm sure I'm going to make a couple tweaks this year and add a couple things. It seems like we get some new metrics every year to play with. So I'm always, willing to grow and expand. But at a high level, I'm projecting the odds of the starting pitcher striking out the hitter for every single plate appearance. And I think the best way to do that is through my simulation. So I'm simulating their start, 10,000 times where, I have the first time through the order, I have the percent chance that they're going to strike that hitter out. And that is based on, obviously, the pitcher-hitter matchup, their platoon splits, park factors, the temperature. Some of these, dictate more than others. So temperature is like a slight tweak. But I think one of the most important things is how many times they get through the order and potentially where they're going to get pulled from their start. So, we're already projecting, how many pitches are going to throw and how far they're going to go in the game. But I think that really matters because if they get pulled, on average, I'm projecting them to get pulled around the number 5 hitter the third time through. If those 6, 7, 8, 9 hitters are their best strikeout victims, that's actually going to lower their chances of, clearing a certain number, especially if the top 5 are, tougher to strike out. So that's a lot of times that ends up being kind of the edge I find out if I'm on an under or sometimes an over. So expecting kind of where the pitcher is going to get pulled is important. And going back to how many times through the order, that's important too, because the first time through the order, the pitcher's typically going to have their biggest edge and have a higher strikeout rate. And then, the second time through the order, it's going to drop a bit. Third time, even more. That depends on pitcher. So I'm factoring that in as well. So at the end of that, you're seeing the projection and the odds, the edge we're showing on actionnetwork.com and our prop tool. And then even from there, I like to take it a step further and look at, who the umpire is going to be. If they have a big or smaller strike zone, there could be, tweak there this year with the challenge being implemented. But also just, how the pitcher matches up against the lineup. I was a former pitcher. You have a plan if you're a pitcher, and I could tell by looking at a pitcher's profile how they like to get guys out, whether they like to get, ahead early in the count, flood the zone, get guys to chase, and sort of see how that matches up against the opposing lineup and the projected lineup that day, and see if it jives with that pitcher or not. So there's a lot of different things that I'm looking at, even outside of my typical process.
Don't have to worry about the challenge system for this year. They're only testing it out in spring training, but it seems like it will get implemented next year. And I have some deep thoughts on how that's actually going to completely change the batter-pitcher dynamic in baseball. I think it's a huge advantage for hitters, and I also think it's just going to change generally the approach hitters have going forward. So maybe on an episode next year, we'll talk a little bit more about strikeout props, because I do have some very deep thoughts that there's going to be some downstream effects other than just implementing the challenge system. It's certainly going to depend on how many challenges you get per game. If it's just 2 per game, may not have that significant of an effect. Let's talk about some of the challenges that you've had in terms of creating this process, right? You're simming everything 10,000 times. But for instance, 4 new managers in baseball this season, when you have new managers, you may get different pitcher usage. You may get a shorter hook, a longer leash for some of these pitchers. Is that something you're trying to figure out in advance, or just something you're responding to on the fly? Or are you just regressing it sort of to like a league average stat at that point when you have a new manager involved?
That is definitely something I'd want to adjust on the fly. I wouldn't want that to be too automated. And my initial guess is probably wrong. So that is definitely something I would monitor closely, because when it comes to these strikeout props, you'd be surprised how often it does come down to when the manager decides to pull them. I've had so many sweats over the years where I need them to stay in for a couple more hitters, or I need them pulled. And just knowing kind of the psychology of the manager and how they, handle those situations helps. My stress level, I've already made the bet at that point. It just helps manage my stress levels. But that's a great point. Yeah, anytime we have a new manager, their tendencies are going to be a bit different on how long they like to extend pitchers, maybe when they like to extend pitchers. So that's definitely something that I'm, kind of factoring in on a day-to-day basis.
Are you looking at final spring training starts or anything like that for the first start of the season? Because that's a little bit different too. Once guys settle into the season, roughly what their career averages are, how long they typically go into starts, how long they've gone throughout the season. But for the first 2 starts of the season, are you looking to see how stretched out they are in spring? Or again, is it just sort of like a normalized baseline for first start of the season? This is on average how deep guys typically go.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's why typically I'm a little bit more cautious on the opening start of the season, because obviously their pitch count's going to be way lower. So we're kind of just playing a guessing game. I don't like to make too many bets where just there's a ton of uncertainty, because where's the edge in that? So, I still dive in and look at all of them and see if there's an edge I can find. But typically I like having, at least one start under their belt. And during that time, taking information, seeing, where their velocity is. We can certainly be doing that during spring training, seeing where their velocity is, seeing their pitch mix, seeing if, they're incorporating a new pitch or throwing, specific pitch more or less, and sort of how that could dictate their strikeout rate over the course of the season. So usually the first start, it's just information gathering. It's a really fun time for me, but I'm not locking in as many bets. But once they have that first start under the belt, I'm ready to rock. And I'll usually pounce on their second start if I find something. But yeah, usually early on, it's more of a just information gathering process for me.
I want to drill a little bit more into the simulation aspect and the fact that you could arrive at 2 different pitchers. Say the over-under is 5.5 strikeouts. You have 2 different pitchers. You project both on average for 6 strikeouts, but the range of outcomes for one may be drastically different than the others. So is there a chance that I could go into your projections, as I said, see over under 5.5 strikeouts, minus 110 for both pitchers, see both pitchers projected for 6 strikeouts, but I might see a much larger edge on the over for one than the other. Is that a possibility?
Oh yeah, that's a great question because they might have the same projection, but the odds might be slightly different because through the simulator, there's some lineups where a pitcher, there's a couple hitters where it's like they have to get these guys out. They have a high strikeout rate, or there's a couple hitters where there's no way they're going to strike them out. They just need to get them to get early contact and get to the next hitter. So yeah, you can have slightly different distributions, even though their median projection is the same. So that's why I kind of, even when I make one of these bets and write it up, I kind of indicate like they absolutely have to be striking this hitter out, or else we're toast, or vice versa. So yeah, it kind of depends on whether the lineup is pretty steady. They just every single hitter they have a 25% chance to strike him out, or it's a couple really tough, couple really easy. It can really skew the distribution.
How often do you bet alternates? Like, you have that over 5.5. I don't necessarily remember you suggesting like plus money alternate strikeout totals. Is that a market that you look into? Do you see as much or less value there? Is that why you haven't dove into it?
Yeah, I think the market does a pretty good job of doing that. So I usually don't find that big of an edge doing that. If there is a guy I really love for a specific start, like I remember last year I had Michael King to lead the entire slate in strikeouts. I think I did dabble and do like a ladder. And I say, sometimes I'm betting on a guy's over. I think he has a ton of upside. I say, hey, if you want to bet the alternate markets, go for it. Like this is a ladderable play. So if I remember Michael King, for whatever reason, like the lineup he was facing just set up perfectly for him. So I was just saying I'm all in on his over and laddering it, and also the most strikeout market, which is also something I handle in my simulator where I have all 30 pitchers simulating that 10,000 times and seeing the odds of them actually leading the entire slate in strikeouts. So I do that too. And if I remember Michael King, I was all over his over and his alt overs. But yeah, you're right. It's not as common. I'm typically just attacking their median prop. But there are some cases where I say go ahead and bet their ladder and their alternate overs.
Yeah, and I think if you're interested enough in the alternate over for a guy who's already expected to strike out a number of people, there's probably a good chance that he's an edge to lead the slate overall in strikeouts as well, or a decent chance of getting both of those markets too. And that's probably the best way of playing the overall upside. Let's talk a little bit, back up a little bit and just talk about like repetition and guys that you find as value bets. How often you're going to find yourself betting on them consistently or betting on them throughout a season, how often you end up having to take the other side because the market adjusts so heavily. I think back to Brandon Pfaadt, Nick Martinez, guys like that last year who they pop up as value once, they pop up as value again. Their third start in a row, I'm like, all right, am I going to show value on this guy? I do. And I do 2 more times. And then all of a sudden 5 starts in, the market has adjusted, or, my data points have corrected and I no longer show value betting on that team. There may also just be a different splits matchup on the opposing side of that matchup, what have you. But do you find throughout a season, throughout individual seasons, you bet the same pitchers over or under, like multiple starts in a row? Or is it a little bit more random? It's a start-to-start basis, and you just happen to see what pops up in the magic box every day?
Yeah. So it's mainly random. Anytime I wake up, I'm willing to bet the over/under on any pitcher. I have no bias. But there was a stretch there where it seemed like Logan Gilbert kept starting on the road, and just based on park factors and the matchups, I kept being on his under, and it was going well enough that I didn't stop it. But it's not like I'm against Logan Gilbert or anything. It was just that's the way the numbers were setting up. Maybe the market was too high on him, but I just kept showing value on the under. Wasn't intentional, just turned out to be that way. There was part early in the season where Schwellenbach, started to heat up a little bit. His prop was 3.5 strikeouts. I was like, this might be the last time we get his strikeout prop at 3.5. Everything I'm seeing is just screaming breakout. So I bet the over 3.5 strikeouts. Sure enough, he finished with 3. He had maybe like 12 2-strike counts. and only managed to punch out 3. So I'm like, well, there you go. And then I think he went 12 of the next 14 starts, not only clearing 3.5, but like 5.5. So it's like, it was just classic timing, but I pegged him as like a guy that we need to just be taking as over right now, as much as possible until the market catches up. So there are certainly a ton of instances like that where I'm just picking a pitcher and saying it's time to invest on them until the market catches up. Whether it's the over or the under.
I think there could have been a potential scouting versus data advantage. Schwellenbach wasn't a guy who had like super high scouting reports, but he was a guy I immediately fell in love with at the MLB level, to the point where I'm betting him at 50-1 for NL Cy Young this season. He throws 6 pitches.
Nice.
He has a really deep arsenal. I think he's a very good pitcher, but I do think there was a disagreement between the scouting value of when he came up and the actual data points that he was passing along. So you mentioned the Logan Gilbert home road split. Seattle, obviously a great home pitcher's park. I didn't realize Gilbert had, a potential drastic home road split, but stuff like that, home road splits, pitchers potentially going to significantly worse parks, facing a lineup full of hitters who have a certain handedness that doesn't agree with them. Are there common threads aside from splits or within splits that you find with pitchers who you're typically betting the over or under on throughout the season?
Yes and no. I think one of the things that I started doing a lot more of last year was trying to find guys that are getting lucky or unlucky with their put away rate. So I look at, their whiff rates for all their pitches, which, is every single count. And then sometimes they can start to get lucky on, their sliders striking out a lot more players than they're expected just based on their whiff rates, or vice versa. So this is especially early in the season. I mean, when we get to the end of the season, I feel like the market's so sharp and football's here. I'm not betting as much, but certainly earlier in the season, I can catch guys that just based on their pitch mix, I think they should have a much higher K rate or lower. And a lot of times that's why I'm showing value on them. They're kind of getting lucky or unlucky with 2 strikes just based on their expected, whiff rates and their put away rates. So that's one thing that I kind of incorporated last year that was really fueling a lot of the bets that I was like actually locking in last year.
I'd imagine you probably bet more unders than overs. I do with game totals throughout a year. I feel like I have a 60-40 balance of unders to overs. Do you find a similar like split in the K props? I feel like more people want to bet overs than unders, which would lead to the sharp side generally being under.
Yeah, definitely. I think with everything, usually the public loves betting overs. So I'm typically on unders. And that's certainly the case with strikeout props. I think people kind of underestimate just how much a pitcher's strikeout rate drops throughout the game. And then they're typically going to get pulled before the bottom of the lineup where, hitters strike out more. So there's a lot of things kind of go. And, there's a lot of different outs. The pitcher can get pulled early because they're getting, shelled, or they get injured or ejected. So there's a lot more outs for the under. So typically I'm going to be on the under. But it's also interesting because I feel like people bet on overs because they like offense, they like scoring. When you're betting on a strikeout prop over, you're essentially rooting for just offense and, the pitcher to get shelled. So it's actually fun. When you're on an under, you get to root for the offense. But as a former pitcher myself, I love betting on overs and rooting for the pitcher to do good. So I have fun rooting for both sides. So I'm typically not like choosing one or the other because it's more fun to root for. But certainly I think the way the market usually handles these, you're typically finding more value on the unders more times than not.
How many of those under sweats come down to, I need this guy to stay on the bench and not come out for another inning? Is it 50-50? Is it more than 50-50? Like how many times are you just waiting on the manager to make a decision?
I mean, it's I don't have the exact figure off the top of my head, but it's got to be more like 80%. I feel like anytime you have the under, it's never fun. It's never easy. Because, again, they usually get off to a hot start. Usually the pitcher has the edge early on, and then you just need the second, third time through the lineup factor to come through. So you're usually behind the curve, and you need the pitcher to get pulled. I remember there was one time, Luis Severino, I had the under, I don't know what it was, 5.5 strikeouts. And he must have given up, 6 runs in the first 2 innings. His pitch count was like over 40. He had maybe 1 or 2 strikeouts at that point. And I thought we were sitting pretty. And then flash forward to the sixth inning. He's well over 100 pitches. There's no reason to be out there, and they're just dragging his carcass out there. And now all of a sudden he's striking guys out. So the Discord was not having fun with that one. And then he finally got pulled with like 120 pitches for some reason, with 5 strikeouts. But that prop was maybe 2 to 3 innings of just like, why the hell are they not pulling him? But yeah, that happens more times than not. And usually you're on the under, rooting for them to get pulled. Certainly that happens when you're on the over, but the under, I feel like most of the sweat is just trying to get them pulled from the game.
Experience is so painful, you can remember it in vivid detail. It's truly astonishing. Why do we do this to ourselves?
Yeah,
no, that's great info from Sean. We're gonna get to a few more questions in a moment, but with Major League Baseball right around the corner, now is the perfect time to get yourself an Action Pro account so that you can get Sean's strikeout prop projections and also get real-time pick alerts from myself and other Action Network's experts, including Sean and his strikeout prop alerts and more. Right now, subscribing can get $20 off a year of Action Pro at actionnetwork.com/pro and use promo code POD20. That's promo code POD20 for $20 off a year of Action Pro. So you'll be covered for March Madness, the upcoming baseball season, plus next college football and NFL seasons too. Don't wait. Visit actionnetwork.com/promo code or actionnetwork.com/pro and use promo code POD20 right now for $20 off a year of Action Pro. Sean, let's talk a little bit more about, if you are a pro subscriber, where we can find your projections, where we can access them, and then the times that may be actionable to use them based upon your schedule. You living on the West Coast, we want people to actually get the best information available. So first off, where can we find your projections and what's the best place to get them?
Yeah, so you can find them on actionnetwork.com. We have the props tool also on the app where we're showing, the top edges for not only, strikeout props, but every other prop really we're projecting. Strikeout props is just my favorite, and I really dive into those. We could talk about home run props later as well. But so anything, over an 8 out of 10, we're going to be showing enough value where I think that's a potential play. I would also just look at it separately to see, maybe why we're showing value there. I usually lock in my bets around noon my time, so that's West Coast time, and I usually have full write-ups as far as my reasoning. And at that time, I'm going to have the projections fully up to date. So, if you're East Coast time and you're looking at the projections and it's say 6 a.m. over here on the West Coast, I would just take them with a grain of salt, especially if there's a guy, only expected to pitch a couple innings. We might be projecting him for, 4 or 5 at that point and showing a ton of value on the over. Just, have some common sense with those because, as always, the pitch count, the projected pitch count and how many innings we think they're going to go is obviously a huge part of the projections. And that's really the main thing that I'm tweaking in the morning is just their expected pitch count, how long expect them to be in the game. But if you think the projection's about right, and this is a player that has been pretty consistent with, how long they've been in games, then I would certainly kind of get ahead of that before I potentially lock it in our app and it moves. But typically around noon every day Pacific time, they're going to be good to go.
And do you like to wait for lineups personally before placing a bet? If the edge is big enough, I'd imagine you're okay firing. Yeah. But if it's closer to borderline, you like to wait.
Yeah, definitely like to wait for the official lineup to come out, the umpire lineup to come out, who's going to be behind the dish. But there are some situations where I'm like, if this guy is not in the lineup today, it's going to move the strikeout prop by like a half. So there are certain situations where I really want to wait. But if it's a pitcher, I'm just showing value on. I don't really care what the lineup is. I'll lock it in earlier. So, as with everything sports betting, it kind of depends. But more times than not, I like to have the official lineup just in case, just to have all the information. But it's certainly a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, those projections always subject to lineup and umpire changes, could tweak slightly. But let's talk about some of the other factors you consider beyond just your pure projection when you're going to make a play. What are some of the other factors you're looking at? We'll talk about some other prop types in a second. But with strikeout props, you run your sim, you have your number, you see the line, you're shopping for best available odds. What else goes into that decision-making process?
Yeah, so again, it goes back to just kind of how the pitcher matches up against the opposing lineup. So, just at a high level, if the pitcher is relying on hitters to chase pitches in order to get strikeouts, if he's facing a lineup that's very patient, doesn't chase outside the zone, I'm going to need to show a lot bigger edge, so to speak. So I'm really just kind of making sure that the other factors kind of line up for that. And also, like I said, just the recent luck or, bad luck when it comes to their whiff rates and put away rates. So I'm just looking at all these like really minuscule little factors to make me feel good about locking it in. And again, if I'm looking at the recent pitch mix, if they're like starting to mix in their sinker a bit more, they're just trying to get the ball in play more. I'll notice that by looking at recent starts and kind of just seeing any recent trends where it looks like they're shifting their approach just in terms of, how they're getting hitters out. But I'm pretty obsessive with just looking at all these things to see if I catch something. I'm basically trying to prove myself wrong and back out of a bet. So when I'm locking in a bet, it usually means I'm liking, what I'm seeing. I'm liking who's behind the dish. I'm liking the lineup they put out. Just I'm liking everything I'm seeing. So it's a very arduous process to kind of get it to be an official play for a reason, of course.
One market that's correlated to strikeout props that may be a little bit easier to project, though for that reason there may not be as much value in it, is outs recorded, because with strikeout props you have the batters faced element, but then on top of that you have to compute the strikeout projection for each individual matchup as you're simulating, where for total batters faced you're basically just taking that usage element and then betting off of that. So because it's a little bit easier to project, do you not see as much value in it, or is it just not as widely available that it's worth betting into? What are your thoughts on batters faced and outs recorded, I should say?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a great market and certainly another angle to kind of attack if you have any kind of specific insight on the matchup. It's certainly a great market. I just don't have time to also look into that. Plus, it's also, really comes down to the manager. So when you get to key out numbers like 15, 18, whether they're going to even come back out to get an extra out or two, I think that takes an extra level of insight that I don't have as much time as I would like. So I typically I've attacked it at times. The only other, and it's not as widely as available, and I'm just trying to focus on strikeout props, but the only other market that's similar is walk props. Sometimes I dabble in those because it's really easy to kind of just load in my walk projections. It's similar to my strikeout process, but those sometimes have been just terrible sweats. I've done good at them, but they're not as fun to root for as strikeouts. Rooting for like over under 1.5 walks, but that's another market I think is very correlated with my strikeout process. So that's the only other market I really have tapped into in the past.
Let's talk about some hitter markets. You can find all of Sean's projections as the biggest edges will pop up in the Action Network app for pro subscribers. Total bases, runs scored, RBI leaders for that day. I bet on all sorts of random stuff. I'll be trying to fire in some more same game parlays with stuff I've correlated in this year, depending on what pops up in there. But what are your favorite hitter markets to bet into, and where can we find some of your hitter projections on a daily basis?
Yeah, so again, all the hitter projections and edges you can find in our prop tool on actionnetwork.com and in our Action Network app. And the hitter market I care about most is home runs. I mean, strikeouts are the single best thing a pitcher can do. Takes out all the luck, if you strike the hitter out. Same thing with home runs for a hitter. If you hit the ball out of the park, it takes out all the other things that you're relying on luck. So home runs are my favorite hitter market to attack. It's also just my favorite process in terms of our projections on the back end. And this is one I typically just, if I see an edge in the app, I'll think, why would it be showing an edge? I just blindly bet it. Like I just know what's going into it and trust it. So I usually, if I see an edge there and I like it, I fire away. It's not as intense as the strikeout simulator, and I'm looking at umpires and all this stuff. So, I mean, the basic process of our home run projection in the app is we're projecting just the pitcher hitter matchup, the odds the ball will be hit in play. So in order to hit a home run, the ball has to be hit in play. So we have the projection for that. And then the odds that if it's hit in play, it's going to be in the air, so a fly ball. And that's, again, based on the pitcher-hitter matchup and platoon splits and everything else. And then just the odds of that player hitting a fly ball in that park on that day with the weather and wind and whatnot, the chances it's going to leave the yard. So we have that projection for, the number of times we expect them to face the starting pitcher and then the bullpen. So it's just a really straightforward, in-depth process that has done really well. If there's big edge on a home run prop, they've done pretty well. So that's one market that I kind of just blindly follow our tool.
And are those going to update? And you'll be comfortable with those numbers around the same time as the strikeout leader props around noon West Coast time?
Yeah, actually, I'd be comfortable with those right away because those are just if the hitter's in the lineup, there you go. And if they're not, then you typically get voided. But yeah, when it comes to the pitcher prop, that's also getting updated automatically throughout the day too. So if a lineup comes in, it's automatically updating that. So you don't have to worry about me going in there and fiddling with things. As soon as a lineup is announced in, it updates, and that's exactly what my projection is. So same thing with the home run props, but that's a little bit more straightforward where the hitter's either in or out. If they were expected to hit second and now they're hitting eighth for whatever reason, that might take away, a potential at bat. So that'll lower their projection, but that's typically not the case. But that's something to look out for. Certainly, if they move down the lineup, their home run projection will move down, or if there's any uncertainty who's starting that game on the other side, that will obviously influence it. But that one's pretty straightforward and automated. So in the morning, once we populate the tool, those will pretty much be good to bet.
Great stuff. Anything else that you think is important in the prop market, the way you analyze it, the way you project it that we didn't cover that you want to mention?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. And again, I'm pretty transparent. I'm usually in our Discord talking about, what I'm looking at when the projections are up to date. And again, just I'm kind of tweaking and refining my process every year. So we might have more stats. We might even have more markets. I can't wait till we have fielding markets, like putaways, assists, anything we can project. So I'm always constantly evolving, and I might find some new market I like this year. So definitely, follow me in the app and in our Discord to kind of see my thought process with everything.
Yeah, Jim Turvey texted me this morning, deep cut, but have you seen a to lead in home run allowed market anywhere? And I was like, I have not, but I would love to bet into that. Lance Lynn doesn't currently have a job, but oh man, that would just be such a delightful market to bet. Pitcher to lead the league or lead the slate in home runs allowed, right? Who's going to give up 3 bombs today?
I would love that.
That'll do it for this special edition episode of Payoff Pitch. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode of the show. We'll be here every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday morning throughout the MLB season. Also, please leave us a 5-star rating and review. Really appreciate all feedback. Doesn't matter what you say, positive or negative, as long as you leave us those 5 stars. Make sure to download the free award-winning Action Network app to follow all of our action experts so you can track your own bets. Very special thank you to Sean Koerner for joining the episode today. I'm Sean Zerillo. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.